Origin traces back to a paperback on a shelf and a headline that refused to die. Jack Ketchum wrote a 1989 novel called The Girl Next Door, and he wrote it with fury in his throat. A 1965 Indianapolis case, Sylvia Likens, 16, dead after months inside a neighbor's house, supplied the spine of his outrage. From that book, a 2007 film took its cue and kept the moral electricity even while changing labels. Art moved through memory like current through wire, preserving the shock while refitting the frame. Names were swapped, dates nudged, and a narrator added so the audience could not sit outside the room. What began as a case file became a mirror that asks, if you were there, what would you have done? Before screens and actors, however, there was a front door, a porch, and a decision that seemed ordinary. Work on the road made childcare necessary, and a neighbor with many children seemed like an answer. Money exchanged hands, promises were spoken, and two sisters carried suitcases into a house they did not own. Trust, in that moment, felt like a cheap and simple thing to give. Indianapolis in the mid-60s looked like postcards, trim lawns, church bells, evening news on black and white sets. Carnival routes had taken the parents away, and the arrangement was supposed to be brief and manageable. Gertrude Benishevsky, thin and tired and surrounded by kids, accepted the weekly payments for supervision. Sylvia Likens and Jenny Likens entered as guests and helpers, not as a story for the ages. At first, chores and curfews were all anyone expected, nothing more serious than household rules. Under the strain of bills and health, kindness began to crack, then crumble, then collapse. Discipline started looking like punishment, and punishment started feeling like sport. A pecking order formed around the couch, with adult approval acting like oxygen for cruelty. Neighborhood boys drifted in as if the living room were a clubhouse with special permissions. Shame became a tool, isolation became a setting, and threats became the grammar of the house. Jenny, younger and struggling with mobility, learned the economics of survival in a place without mercy. Witnesses rationalized, participants hardened, and silence glued the system together day after day. Calls for help never made it past fear, habit, or the hope that tomorrow would be better. Meanwhile, a teenage girl kept trying to protect a sister and hold on to a sense of self. Dignity, even in small scraps, is stubborn, and that stubbornness angered people who wanted total control. Summer drifted toward autumn, and the outside world kept looking normal because evil hides well in daylight. Radio jingles played, laundry snapped on the line, and a dog barked while a life got smaller. In a timeline that now reads like a warning label, October 26, 1965 arrived with finality. Emergency voices filled rooms that had known only TV static and whispered orders. Medical language, subdural hematoma, shock, malnutrition, replaced the pointed euphemisms of the living room. Police notebooks captured names, ages, and contradictions, then drew arrows that led back to one woman. Prosecutors followed the arrows into a courtroom where community denial had no place to sit. Jurors listened to a sister brave enough to speak and to boys old enough to know better. Verdicts landed with the weight of a state saying, "We saw this too late, but we see it now." Gertrude was found guilty of first-degree murder, Paula of second-degree, and 3 boys of manslaughter. Appeals complicated the ledger, a retrial reaffirmed guilt, and time marched in its indifferent way. Parole eventually arrived to public anger, and cancer wrote the last line of one perpetrator's story. None of that closed the wound for a family or the city that had to face itself. Teachers added examples to training. Neighbors learned to knock twice, and police briefings shifted their emphasis. The lesson hardened into a single sentence that still matters. Cruelty grows wherever watchfulness dies. Sylvia Likens became, and remains, more than a case. She is a name meant to sharpen attention. Friends remembered mischief, laughter, and ordinary kindness, details that keep her human against the flattening of headlines. Commemorations, plaques, and advocacy work turned grief into a standing instruction. Ask, check, and keep asking. Real life, in its plain voice, begged future witnesses not to outsource their conscience to the crowd. A film crew decades later stepped into this gravity and chose to dramatize the mechanism rather than the minutes. The Girl Next Door opened with nostalgic gloss porches glowing, kids on bikes, ice clinking in summer glasses. Under that warm palette waited a story about permission, imitation, and the speed of moral decay. Meg Laughlin took the place of Sylvia Likens, and Ruth Chandler stood where Gertrude once stood. A boy named David narrated from years later, dragging guilt behind his voice like a chain. Shifts in time moved the setting to 1958, inviting viewers to drop their guard under amber light. Cinematography favored still frames in quiet rooms, letting dread accumulate like dust in a corner. Ruth handed out beer, jokes, and approval, the trifecta that turns a living room into a theater. Dares became rules, rules became rituals, and rituals became the weather inside the house. David watched, flinched, waited, and told himself stories about tomorrow that never turned true. An almost intervention teased relief and then evaporated, the way many chances do in real neighborhoods. The final movement of the movie refused a courtroom cadence and leaned instead on memory as punishment. Regret narrated the credits, and the audience was told, politely but firmly, to take that regret home. Accuracy, measured by documents, was not the target. Accuracy, measured by mechanism, absolutely was. Narrative craft in The Girl Next Door worked like a scalpel, cutting away spectacle to expose structure. Basements symbolized moral hell, yet bright kitchens kept reminding viewers that daylight does not disinfect. Performances sold the slide from charm to contempt, a change many people recognize from real life. Sound design avoided jump scares and let refrigerators hum with terrible normalcy. Editing held shots long enough to force a decision: keep looking or look away. The framing choice, older David guiding us, made the screen into a confession booth. Crucially, that choice turned spectators into potential accomplices or potential witnesses, which is the point. Theme accuracy hovered around the honest range of 70 to 80% if you insist on a number. Numbers soothe audiences, but the moral is sharper than any metric. Mechanisms repeat unless someone interrupts them, and stories can teach interruption. By the end, viewers were not offered catharsis. They were offered a job. Tell someone early, check twice, insist gently, and escalate if you must. If your courage trembles, borrow some from the person who might need it. No one has perfect information when it counts, and waiting for perfect is a way to lose. Call anyway. Document anyway. Knock anyway, because maybe beats too late every time. Films end with logos. Neighborhoods continue after the credits, for better or worse. The Real House had mail, chores, and laughter before it had headlines. People lived on that street with no music cue to warn them what was growing. A single extra conversation might have altered the arc, which is sobering and motivating. Training exists now that did not exist then, and reporting paths are clearer and faster. All that progress is a promise we owe to names like Sylvia's. Every retelling should return her dignity before it returns to analysis. Every script should avoid spectacle and hold close to choices, consequences, and the map of power. Audiences can handle gravity. What they need is clarity and a clear door to action. Creators owe victims restraint, context, and a focus on systems rather than on suffering. Responsible storytelling is not less compelling. It is simply more honest about aim. Horror that matters shows you how harm organizes itself and how to slow it down. The 2007 adaptation chose precisely that mission and wore its choices in plain sight. Changed names announced a parable. A shifted year announced a thesis about nostalgia. An adult narrator announced that memory can hurt enough to educate. Some lit frames announced that evil adores ordinary rooms. Minimal courtroom material announced that this is about us, not just them. By the last line, the mirror refused to let you shrug and walk away unchanged. Cinema, at its best, leaves you with a sentence you cannot forget. For this story, that sentence might be as simple as ask twice. Another version is, don't wait for perfect. A harder one is, do the thing even if your voice shakes. All of them beat the alternative, which is another headline no one wanted to write. On platforms that reward outrage, choose steadiness instead, because steadiness helps. In comment sections that chase gossip, set a different tone, because tone spreads. When viewers ask for resources, give them practical numbers and local links. If younger audiences discovered this case through a reel, treat their curiosity with care. A quick warning can protect someone who needed it and never says so. A quiet nudge toward reporting can save a life that will never know your name. That is a better ending than any twist. That is a better legacy than any rating. Real life gave this story its power. Art gave it reach. Both are responsible for what audiences do next. Guilt alone is not the goal. Preparedness is. Fear alone is not useful. Habits are. Habits can be learned by repetition, just like cruelty was. Replace the wrong repetitions with better ones and watch change stack up. Neighbors in 1965 did not have our vocabulary for the bystander effect. We do, and we should use it not as jargon, but as a prompt to move. Administrators now brief staff on early indicators. Teachers document concerns sooner. Nurses chart what feels off. Any viewer can join that chain by choosing action over afterthought. A culture is just a pile of tiny decisions made again and again. Enough better choices add up to a different headline someday. Enough vigilance turns a house back into a house instead of a stage. Enough practice makes bravery feel like routine, which is the goal. This is why origin matters, and why adaptation choices matter, and why endings must point beyond themselves. Ketchum's novel swung hard at complicity. The film kept swinging. Neither text claimed to be the courtroom. Both tried to be the conscience. One gave you the names you needed. The other gave you the question you cannot drop. Taken together, they press a single demand into the palm of your hand. Carry vigilance the way people carry phones, keys, and habits. Check once for directions and once for someone who might need you. Do not wait for a dramatic soundtrack to cue your moment. Most rescues look like ordinary interruptions of something that felt normal to someone else. Most heroes feel like nosy neighbors 5 minutes before they are thanked. Most tragedies look inevitable only after they have finished. That illusion dissolves when someone knocks twice, calls early, or refuses a cruel rule. Any of us can be that person on any random weekday. Any street can hold a story that depends on that person showing up. Any retelling that remembers this truth is doing honorable work. Storycraft, then, is a tool for public safety, not just for entertainment. Lighting choices can confront denial. Pacing can model patience. Narration can turn memory into a coach. A closing card can point to helplines. A pinned comment can pin courage. Even the thumbnail can avoid exploiting pain and still signal urgency. You are not helpless in the face of awful history. You are responsible for the use you make of it. Imagine if that responsibility had been common in the summer of 1965. Imagine the headline that never would have been written. Imagine the names that would have stayed private and unbroken. That imagined future is the reason to keep telling this story correctly. Respect for Sylvia means accuracy, restraint, and a door out of the theater into action. Respect for Jenny means acknowledging survival without turning it into spectacle. Respect for viewers means trusting them with truth and offering them tools. Respect for yourself means aligning your voice with prevention, not with prurience. Memory can be a weight or a weapon. Choose the version that protects. Narratives like this should end with something people can do on their own street. Look twice at the small signs that once felt ignorable. Listen when a quiet kid goes quieter. Notice when a living room turns into a stage for one person's power. Ask a second question, even if the first gets a polite answer. Document dates and words if your gut won't settle. Loop in a friend so you do not carry the doubt alone. Call the number that exists precisely for uncertain moments. Follow up once, then again, because persistence breaks systems that rely on silence. 10 minutes is sometimes the difference between escalation and interruption. No one will grade you for being early. Someone might live because you were. This is not a slogan. It is logistics. This is not melodrama. It is maintenance. This is not about villains in masks. It is about choices in daylight. The girl next door shows the diagram of failure. The real case shows the invoice. Together, they insist that audiences do more than feel. If you ever wonder what to say after watching, try starting with, "I'll check on them." If you ever wonder whether to knock, assume the answer is yes. If you ever wonder whether to report, let the professionals decide what you are seeing. No story is worth more than a person, and no hesitation is worth a life. Endings in art are tidy. Endings in life are earned. Earn the next one by refusing to let silence do its quiet work. And if you need one last line to carry out the door, keep this one within reach. Watchfulness is not paranoia. It is love with open eyes.